Today's SciCommers Mentor Chat guest is Chris Cogswell from the Mad Scientist podcast. And the Mad Scientist podcast is a comedy show about the history and philosophy of science and pseudoscience. So Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. Hey everybody, my name is Chris. I am a podcast host of a mid-sized podcast called the Mad Scientist Podcast. My background, I guess, is in chemical engineering and philosophy. I have a PhD in chemical engineering, and when I was in grad school, it's funny actually, I went to Northeastern, so just a little ways down the road from you all. I was sitting in the XRD room, so X-ray diffraction, and just sort of always really enjoyed reading about the philosophy of science and theory of science, and especially pseudoscience and sort of conspiracy theory and conspiracism in general. And I used to get into these long conversations with my lab mate all the time, Dinara. And one day we were in the XRD room and Dinara was like, "You should really start a podcast because it's really interesting. The stuff you're talking about is really cool. I'd love to learn more about it, and I'm sure other people would be interested." And so I actually got started by acting as a science consultant for another podcast called Astonishing Legends. And after doing that for about like a year and a half, really, and talking to the hosts of that show, Scott and Forrest, I kind of learned, well, what goes into making a podcast episode, what goes into marketing one as sort of an independent podcast, what goes into really running the day-to-day operations and things. And so just sort of decided one night that, you know what, I'm going to try writing an episode and then recording it, and we'll see what happens. And sort of inartfully, I guess I'll say, I made myself a logo with like Microsoft, or not Microsoft Paint, with like the Apple version of Paint, essentially. Made myself a logo, got myself an account on Podbean, which was free at the time, and then recorded an episode using a microphone that another indie podcaster had sent me, because they had gotten an extra microphone that they hadn't used, or they were no longer using. They'd switched over to a better one. So I just recorded it in my living room. And that first episode is horrible. It is echoey. The sound quality is so bad. It's just me reading a script essentially. And I uploaded it because I thought, well, I'll upload it and I'll see what Scott and Forrest think. And before I knew it, I had like 300 downloads that, first week. And I was like, oh, I don't know how well that is doing comparatively. And then when I asked other podcasters, they were like, that's great. That's like amazing. That's like, you should keep going. And so despite the best laid plans to record 8 episodes before launch, I was already launched, so I quickly needed to write and record more episodes, and we have been an episode behind ever since. So that's been pretty exciting. That's my background, kind of in that space of podcasting. I also am a pretty avid skeptic on social media, and also in places like conferences and things like that. Kind of some consulting on things like other podcasts, television shows, stuff like that occasionally, but really kind of trying to use my love of science, and especially for the philosophy of science, and how to put together an argument effectively, trying to use those things to make a show that I like and I would want to listen to, but also try to help promote, sort of rationalism and media literacy and science literacy, which kind of is at the core of the podcast, despite the fact that, we tell jokes about ghosts and whatever. So that's me. That's kind of how I got started in what I do on the show.
Thanks for that, Chris. So you mentioned that the podcast is mid-sized. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so in the world of podcasting, it's sort of interesting. I think people think of a large podcast as being a podcast that hits like 100,000 downloads an episode. But in reality, it's like other self-maintained media jobs, right? So like if you were streaming on Twitch, or if you had a YouTube channel, or if you had a blog or something, right? You would find that the distribution of shows in terms of listenership, downloads an episode, it's something like 99% of podcasts only get like 500 to 1,000 downloads a month, right? In totality, and for everything that they're doing. And then there's a really there's a large middle of podcasts that get anywhere from, say, between 1,000 plus to 10,000 up to maybe, say, 100,000 downloads a month. And then above that number, you really start hitting the heavy hitter podcasts that are getting 200,000 to 1 million downloads a month sorts of numbers. So the podcast industry is pretty interesting because I think it's very its influence is a little, it's sort of like really being into like a cult band or something, right? Like if you were really into Kiss, everything Kiss does seems like a big deal, right? But in this grand scheme of things, like, there's not that many Kiss fans out there, right? Now, no offense to Gene Simmons, please don't come for me. I think he's very litigious. But you know what I mean, right? So with podcasting, it's like, you have shows, say, like Serial, that just came back because Adnan Syed was freed from prison. And they're thinking about giving him a new trial. Shows like Serial, shows like, say, Last Podcast on the Left, those are the far end of the spectrum of success. Most podcasts, like I said, hit a couple of hundred downloads an episode a month, and that's really kind of where they sit.
That's actually really good to hear, especially for people who are interested in starting a podcast, just to have like a reasonable like metric of success. Just because I feel like every time we hear about a podcast from like you found it, or a friend is like, I heard it on a podcast, it's because those are those like heavy hitters. So that's good to know that like a couple hundred downloads a month is pretty solid.
So here's and it really depends on your podcast type too, right? So I can give you an example. Our show, and we can get into like tools for tracking success of podcasts and things like that too, even if you're not a big producer or anything, right? There's really great tools out there. Even say our show, we tend to be in the top 100 of science podcasts for different countries at any given time, right? We've been the #1 natural science podcast in Cape Verde for like a month and a half now. I don't know why, but I love it. I love you, Cape Verde. Keep listening. But we tend to be in that like top 100 range of science shows, and we get between like 2,000 to 3,000 downloads an episode a month. And again, it varies. Our show tends to do better around this time of year, around Halloween, because we got a jack-o'-lantern logo, I guess, and people, that's sort of our niche, I guess. Our brand is very Halloween-y, but like, say, a true crime show, true crime, that kind of skew of demographics in terms of number of downloads and things like that, it's different, right? In true crime, to be within the top, say, 1%, you need a lot more downloads. So there's different numbers that float around, but generally the idea is that if you get more than if each episode you put out gets more than 50 downloads in the first 30, in the first 7 days, I should say the first week, you're within like the top 50% of podcasts, or no, even more, probably top 25. And the way that those metrics are tracked, right? So there's different time scales as well. Our first episode, which is easily the worst episode we've ever put out, has like 30,000 downloads on it now. Do you know what I mean? And it's garbage. We actually had to put in the beginning of it a like a caution statement that was like, we promise it sounds better now. We have good microphones, and it's funny now. It's not just Chris reading a script to himself in a dark room. Um, so yeah, it's very interesting that sort of the way that that works. But so usually the metrics that people look at are the first 7 days after a podcast's episode release.
Mhm.
They look at then the first 30 days. That's usually the metric by which advertisers measure your podcast. And then they look at, so say, lifetime downloads, right? So although our episodes, each episode gets, like I said, between, like say 3,000 to 5,000 in the first 30 days, our total number of downloads, like if I just look at so far in the last 4 months, we've had 62,000 total downloads,
Oh, wow.
right? But that's not from new episodes. That's from people listening to an episode, then going back. And because
Mhm.
podcast consumption it's on demand, right? It's an on-demand piece of media. You can't really measure it like you would say with traditional metrics. And so it makes it kind of challenging. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's a super important question because again, first off, if you're releasing a podcast, I think there's some aspect of it that you have to sort of expect that you are going to be doing this. You have to be doing this because it's fun,
Mhm.
right? I'm on a lot of different, Facebook pages and Twitter pages and whatever Twitter accounts where people say, oh, well, I can help your podcast make you money. You can live off of your podcast. No, you can't. The top podcasts don't live off their podcast practically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's like 5 podcasters in the world who make enough money to actually live off of it. So and that's an exaggeration. Of course, there are very successful podcasts doing great work, but for the most part, if you start off as an independent podcast, you have to expect that for the most part, you're going to be doing this as a labor of love, right? And this is
Mhm.
content you're creating because you like the content, because you believe in what you're doing, because because you love the sound of your voice so much that you can't stop putting them out.
Oh no.
But no, it has to be something you like, right? Because if it's not
Yeah.
something you like, it's podcasting is like, again, other media, other self-measured or self instituted, I guess, media jobs. It's hard. It's hard. It's a slog. There can be weeks where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, right?
Mhm.
And the beauty of it being a hobby, really, for a lot of people, or something that you do as an addendum to the work you do every day, is you don't have to that pressure to keep going, or to kind of chase, like what's popular, what's going to get you the most downloads, we'll look at the most advertisers. You don't have to do that,
Mhm.
which is good. It helps you be creative and allows you to be creative and true to what you want to do.
Yeah, I like that. So from from your first episode, which is terrible, how long from, you said it, not me. I'm just
It's fine.
repeating for the
It's fine.
people. How long did it take for your kind of episode quality to get to maybe not where it is now, but definitely somewhere where you're, much happier about it?
So we are constantly trying to make the podcast sound better, be
Mhm.
better, right? It's, again, sort of a thing where I don't think, if you ever feel like you've gotten as good as this as you're going to get, you've already stopped making interesting stuff.
Mhm.
You always have to be evolving and try to changing what you're doing. I would say for the most part, so the way the podcast evolved, within the first year, I had upgraded to a better microphone and a better system. So within a year, we had hit decent listening quality, I would say.
Mhm.
Then probably by the third year is where I think the show kind of really hit its stride, and where I have been really happy with it. And those are the episodes that if I had to go back and listen to them, I would probably start at season 3 personally,
Hmm.
where I think it really started to be sensible, right? And or at least it started to be in the form that it is now. We did 3 major things that have changed the quality of the show. The first one is we purchased good microphones, good soundboards, um, and ensured that we learned enough about those tools to know what works and what doesn't, and what
Yeah.
is the best way to get the best sound quality you can. The second thing we did was we brought on a co-host. We brought on Marie Mayhew, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. My co-host on the show, who had always sort of helped with the show, but only became a permanent fixture around that 3rd season of episodes. And so the show went from being a scripted one, kind of in the same vein as say like a serial, you know, to now being more conversational. And we still script things
Mhm.
out, of course, but the scripting is much more loose. It's much more of a, you know, where you want the story to go. You have some statistics or numbers or facts you want to get out there. But in between those pieces, there's a bit of going back and forth. And
Mhm.
that's where the personality really comes in. And then the third thing we did, frankly, is we hired a sound editor. We hired somebody who is good at editing the quality of the show. There are really good tools out there that you can use to do sound editing yourself. Audacity is not a terrible option.
Mhm.
If you have a Mac, GarageBand is a great option. GarageBand is very, very good. There are quite good microphones you can get, ETR microphones, on Amazon. They're like $100. Those will immediately improve your sound quality significantly. And even just simple things, right? I mean, this behind me is a mess. This is where I record the podcast, right?
Mhm.
I have a curtain that goes behind me, right? To deaden some noise. I put up little soundboards that go over my wall. And I put a soundboard underneath the microphone stand itself, and then just run noise canceling, and it improves the sound quality immensely.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to go to a sound booth to record a podcast.
Which is also nice that podcast is audio only.
Yes. Oh, thank God.
So.
Oh God, yeah. It's funny, actually. I have a green screen that I do use sometimes for streaming on Twitch. Because that's one thing we've tried breaking off into like other media
Mhm.
avenues as well. Streaming on Twitch is probably my favorite, just because I play a lot of video games anyways.
Mhm.
But yeah, the green screen is hilarious because it's this thing. It's like kind of folded up, and so when I open it, just like it pops open. It's just, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, that is one of the nice things about podcasting, and it also means then that you can record anywhere, right?
Mhm.
You don't need to be limited to a professional studio or something, right? You can record a podcast from home, from your living room.
Yeah, I heard I've had a lot of good advice of people using their closets,
Yep.
which is great because all of your hanging clothes
Dead in the
deaden the
sound.
sound really
Yep.
well. So for the SciCommers out there thinking of podcasts, if you have a closet, buy more clothes so you'll have
Yes.
better sound. It's for the podcast.
It's fine. It's for the podcast. Yeah.
It's fine.
If you have a room, with a closet or even a big blanket or anything, like all of that works as soundproofing, and you don't need to, again, the number one thing you can do for your sound quality is to limit sound that gets into the room.
Mhm.
That's the main thing, the difference in quality between like $1,000 microphone and $100 microphone with adequate soundproofing in the room you're in. I mean, some people might notice, but audiophiles aren't listening to podcasts for the tenor of your voice, right? People are listening to these while they're jogging, or
Mhm.
most people are listening to podcasts through their phones. So it's more about a threshold of listenability than it is about perfect, the perfect waveform for your voice to come through.
Yeah. So you also let me see. So you mentioned that the episodes are more like loosely scripted than they were before.
Mhm.
Is that because um what am I trying to say? What is the question? Is it because when you brought on a co-host, there was just more time to like bringing in a co-host gave more space for it to be more conversational, or like what do you think was
Yeah,
that linking point of that?
yeah, no, I get, yeah, totally. I think honestly, the time, if you're writing a fully scripted show,
Mhm,
I was putting out episodes that were about 20 to 30 minutes long, and they would take me about a week to write. And that was just because it was, or not right. It would take me a week to write and record a whole episode.
mhm,
And that was because if you're reading a script, number one, it's a learned skill to read something and come across as being not sounding like you're reading, right?
mhm,
Sounding natural. And people don't like, I guess I should say, or at least I don't like, and the show is made to be something that I feel like I could listen to. People don't like listening to things that are, it just sounds like somebody droning on about something. I mean, imagine like a lecture in school, right? You wouldn't want to go to the class where the, right? You want it to have a little bit of almost a sing-song quality of the vocals, a bit of a interesting storytelling method.
mhm,
And so doing that from a script is very challenging at first. Um, and on top of that, it's writing a joke, it's writing something to be funny,
yeah.
and then saying it in a way that's funny is not, it's not easy. You know what I mean? That's really hard. And if, especially, at least I guess for me, coming from technical writing, right? Like I wrote I mean, oh my God, there were times in school and undergrad, especially, where I was writing 100 pages a week of philosophy for the courses I
Mhm,
was taking. You know what I mean? Um, but that is different. It's so much easier to write dense philosophy, I find, than writing something that is conversational in your voice, or entertaining but still informing. It's so hard.
mhm,
And what I found was that the times that it came across the best, the times that it came across the most fluid, was when I was imagining just sitting at a bar talking to somebody,
mhm,
talking to a friend. And remember, the show came from me talking to my lab mate Denara about all this crazy stuff, right, that I was into. And so I just thought that having a co-host would make that part of it much easier. And I also thought, frankly, so Marie is really a good foil to the things that I'm good at. So Marie is very smart. Um she's smart, but she is not scientifically technical in the same way that I
mhm,
am. And so I also thought that there were episodes that I did an episode on radiation, and if could radioactivity cause 50-foot monster ants, right? And because we're a serious
yes.
show. So serious. And after the episode, people were messaging me like, it sounded great, but I didn't understand a single thing you said because the jargon was just too dense, you know?
Mhm,
And so and radioactivity isn't even a particularly technical, like, radioactivity is all addition and subtraction. You know what I mean? So from my perspective, it's like not that complicated. But so having somebody who could set the tone and level of jargon that would
mhm,
go into a show naturally really helped. You know what I mean? And then on top of that, Marie brings art history and literature and um social sciences and things, like areas of stuff that I know nothing about, she brings to the table, and it helps really, I think, really give a nice dimension to the show that
mhm.
is, was missing before.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think it's very nice to have it outsourced of someone to remind you that
Yeah,
just because you and your friends know what you're talking about doesn't mean that everyone knows what you're talking about. You
right.
forget.
My PhD advisor would tell me whenever I was writing to imagine that I was writing it for my mom.
Mm,
If my mom could understand it, then it was good to go. You know, because even technical people in related fields to what you're doing, if they're missing the jargon or they're missing 20 years of literature review that
mhm.
you might as well be speaking another language. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it's so important to have that kind of that gut check, I guess.
Yeah. It's also, I've also heard, what is it? If you were like at a party and you were like sharing it as a fun fact, like how would you share it at a
Exactly.
party?
Yes.
So, and that's always been very helpful. So the podcast description says that it's a comedy podcast. Was that a like conscious decision, or do the episodes just end up being funny kind of due to the format?
That's a good question.
Mhm.
I think some of our more scathing reviews would say that we are failing to be funny on
Okay.
purpose. Um, that's one thing. If you're going to podcast, you gotta have a thick skin. Like there are going to be people who are like, "You are terrible." You know what I mean? Like that's going to happen. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, I think partially it comes from just the show format itself, but also it just comes from our personalities.
Mhm.
And the stuff that we're talking about too. Like we talk about the history and philosophy of science, but that stuff a lot of the times the history of science or the philosophy of science, they seem those things feel like very academic stilted sort of subjects, so
Mhm.
and same with like the stem in general, right? I think people think of STEM as being something that's very um dry, right? I won't say boring, but dry. It's a dry
Mhm.
subject. And so when someone is listening to a podcast about the sciences, most people don't want to listen to a textbook being read. And what I have found both in my work, kind of my skeptical work and my science outreach work to what I consider to be, or what I would call non-science communities or even anti-science communities, right? Like people who believe in UFOs or Bigfoot or ghosts or whatever. Um, when you talk to people, the vast majority of people don't stop doing science because they hate science. Most people stop doing science because uh, it's either taught in a way that is too challenging, or too challenging is maybe the wrong word. It requires a certain way of thinking
Mhm.
that I think people move away from. So say mathematics, right? I was really bad at math in high school. I was pretty bad at math. And when I got to college, I was really bad at geometry, trigonometry, and calculus, calc 1 and
Mhm.
2. But when we got to differential equations, it was like a light went off. I understood everything suddenly, very, very easily.
Same.
And I
Mhm.
honestly think the difference is it's a difference about thinking about math algebraically versus geometrically almost, or analogously, right? Diff-EQ is very much so like, well, nature tends to move in these sloping curves. And so if you have a field that's moving this way, chances are it's going to peak and then come down, right? Like to me, that made much more sense intuitively than the algebra ever did. And so I think, for a lot of people, that's the story they tell me is, well, I love science. I love science fiction. I love documentaries on animals or whatever, but I just wasn't good enough at math, or I wasn't good enough at remembering biological names, or I wasn't good at whatever. And so I failed out and I became, something else. Right.
Mhm.
Um, the vast majority of people that are listening to your show that are not going to be scientists, right? They're going to be everyday people who love this stuff and are interested, but maybe fell out of it for whatever reason. And so the comedy, I think, it can help to make it seem less intimidating to people. It also makes it just more enjoyable to listen to, I think. Um, and also some of the stories we tell, some of the stuff we talk about is it's ridiculous. Right? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the history of the sciences is crazy. I mean, Isaac Newton, who we all think about as this, paragon of rationalism and everything else, he considered himself an alchemist. You know what I mean? He believed in alchemy. He believed that in these esoteric ideas and things. And so, you know, um, the world, I think, is just a much weirder, funnier place than the sciences make it seem to people.
Mhm.
And I think that if we're going to be engaging to the public about science, we have to be willing to embrace some of that weirdness. But also, when something is ridiculous, call it ridiculous, right? And
Mhm.
comedy helps do that. It cuts through that. So yeah.
So do you have you like actively practiced comedy for writing the podcast, or is it just that's just kind of
No.
where it is? Okay.
No. So we have thought about and talked about doing something like a live show maybe sometimes,
Mhm.
or things like that, but really it just I mean, when you talk to your friends and you're joking around and making each other laugh, you're not you're not at least I'm not, and this is something we actually talk about on the podcast all the time, is the differences in how people think and how we
Mhm.
never talk about how we think to each other. But anyways, at least when I'm talking to my friends, I am not actively thinking of like jokes that I can say. I just say
Mhm.
stuff that I think will be funny, right? And and that's kind of the way it is with Marie, right? So um it's a skill you'll develop as you get better and better at podcasting, to have more of your personality come through. And if you're a naturally funny person or somebody who likes to tell jokes or crack jokes and tell stories and whatever, that will be something that happens naturally in your show,
Mhm.
you know? So yeah, I think for better or worse, it just sort of is something that happens. Um we don't really write jokes per se.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that when it was scripted, it took about a week from writing to recording.
Yep.
Is that kind of is that time frame kind of the same now since it's not scripted, or is it longer?
It's so much
Longer.
longer. Well, so the thing is that in the beginning of the show, we looked at things that were focused on subjects that I felt like I already knew a bit about.
Mhm.
So things that I had already read. There were books that I had read that I wanted to talk about, and subjects and ideas and everything else. Now, 5 years into the show, my anecdote bag has run empty,
Yeah.
and so now we are constantly reading for the show. So for this, the latest series we're doing is on the Great Irish Famine,
Mhm.
and for that series, I have read two different sort of novels of the history of the famine, hundreds of articles written about the famine and its history, and literally like a textbook is this book called the Atlas of the Great Irish Famine, which is an amazing resource, by the way. I wish there were more things like it about other events in history. It's so good. um and just digging through that and reading. So that for that series, I've been planning a year for that series,
Oh
to
wow.
read the stuff and get the sources and write it out in a way that's coherent. And the recording is just the easy part. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's almost like, I can't believe I read 4 books for an
Mhm.
hour long episode. You know what I mean? Um, so really at this point, the part that takes the longest is the reading and research for the show. The next longest part is putting it together. We use Google Drive for that. We just use a,
Mhm.
Google Doc. And then after that, actually recording it, that's usually the easy part. So we probably record about an hour to an hour and a half per episode, and then maybe 15 minutes of that gets cut. as outtakes or just mispronouncing words and having to go back or whatever. And then from the time we record to the time the episode goes out, it usually takes about a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So during like kind of your, I don't know, topic expeditions, have there been any failed ones? And like, how do you know you're
Oh
like,
yeah.
we're not gonna do this? Like,
Oh yeah. We have an episode that we recorded about the history of gunpowder
mhm,
that has never seen the light of day. Just because it never feels like a good time to release something like that about like firearms. You know what I mean? It
mhm,
just, so I don't know when it will be released. We might have actually finally just thrown it up on the website or something, but it's like stuff like that will happen, that you will record an episode like this one on the Irish famine. We spent like 20 minutes dunking on the monarchy. You know what I mean? And then the queen like passed away, and we were like,
mhm.
oh, our editor emailed us and was like, do we get rid of the stuff on the monarchy? And it's like, no, it's kind of their fault. Like, I don't think we can get rid of it. It's the famine, we can't just pretend history didn't happen, right?
Mhm,
There are other ones that we've done where we have episodes that we have started writing for, but then have not found the type of resourcing or haven't had the time to dig into the sources that we would like to.
mhm,
So we have one series on so that history of gunpowder one is a good example of that. We recorded one kind of interview quasi history episode that did
mhm.
go out, but then the series on that and kind of the history of warfare has never materialized. And
Okay.
it's something I'm interested in doing still, but we just have never done it. Other ones that we've looked at are a history of forensic science. That is kind of the recent one that has been pretty hard to put together.
Mhm,
And that one, it's more because the story is so varied, and there are interesting people we want to talk to about in that series, but it's hard to kind of merge their stories together in a way that is cohesive.
yeah.
And so sometimes for episodes like that, we've just broken them up into, like, we'll do an episode on fingerprinting and an episode on dental forensics and one on
Mhm.
blood spatter analysis and whatever. But with this one, I have like a romantic ideal in my head of what this series will look like, and I don't want to cut it up. So we'll just keep writing it until it's like a 50 series long episode, or a 50 episode long series, I should say.
Fair. So in doing that, I'm sure it's like very helpful to have a team. Do you have suggestions for finding an editor to work with?
Yeah, so
Mhm,
there are actually a lot of so one thing I'll say, there are a lot of people who will tell you how you should make a podcast,
mhm.
and then when you go looking for their show on the charts, they're nowhere to be found.
There.
You know what I mean? There are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about how you should write and edit and market your podcast who do not have a successful podcast.
Mhm,
And I even shy away from telling people what to do or how to do, because mine is successful, but it's, we're not, I'm not exactly, I don't know, we're not interviewing Gwyneth Paltrow about her pseudoscience. You know what I mean? Like, we're not there
mhm,
yet. In terms of finding an editor, you want to find somebody who you trust, who's going to be able to do the work regularly.
mhm,
And also, frankly, like, we didn't start, the editor we actually have working on the show is a friend. It's one of our good friends. And we did not want to bring on anybody until we could pay them.
mm,
We felt like if you're going to put in time, you should get paid for the work, even if it's a little. You know what I mean? So we pay like $100 an episode for editing. And at this point, it's kind of down to a science, right? We record with the same microphones the same way every single time, puts it through a noise gate, gets sort of me saying every other sentence. we're good to go. It does not take a lot of time at this point going forward. But you can find good people. And the thing is too, the independent podcasting community on Twitter, on Facebook, there are a lot of people who are willing to help, and but the one thing I'll say is we have gotten a lot of, once your email is out there because when you make an RSS feed for your show, that RSS feed will have your email in the podcast description, right? It'll be in the RSS feed. You are going to start getting hundreds of emails a week. Hey, I can edit your podcast for this much, or I can do transcribing, or I can do whatever I can do. Unless you searched out the person, you'd be very wary.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so places like, again, Twitter, Facebook, Fiverr can be a good place to find work, right? There are people out there who will do that kind of stuff for you. But honestly, the first year, I would suggest you want to know how that stuff works, even if you don't do it well, right? Like as well as someone could do it. You should know how the editing works. You should know how to do some of the marketing. You should know enough about your kind of business that you're trying to get into, or this hobby you're trying to get into, that when you do find somebody to kind of offload some of the work to, or to help you on that process, that you can trust that, hey, they're doing a better job than I can do on my own. And there's again, you can still keep learning, right? About how to do it better.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. It's a lot of work, so I'm not going to do it, but y'all have fun.
Okay. It is a lot of work, but it is very fulfilling. It's great. Like, it's really fulfilling, and it's really cool to get emails from people that say, hey, you made me change my mind on something. We did a series on climate change, and a guy reached out and said, hey, I had never thought of it this way. I'm actually convinced that something is happening now. And I was like, that's great. That's a really good feeling. And even like just the first time you'll have somebody who you didn't know already tell you that, oh my God, I listened to your podcast. That's an awesome feeling. It's great. It's so cool.
This is my last question before I open it up to the audience, because I'm selfish. How did you guys find your network, the Dark Myths Collective, or did they find you?
So we actually have been part of like many different podcast networks over the years. So Dark Myths was the first one we were with, and we're still technically like in Dark Myths, but not really, because now we have a company that does advertising for us and kind of manages us. But really that just came about from being friends with other podcasts. So Astonishing Legends was on Dark Myths, and a couple other shows like Hysteria 51 and Blurry Photos that we were friends with, and got to know by doing our podcast and kind of learning from them and everything else. And so it was sort of a no-brainer for us to join that network. Podcast networks for indie podcasts are kind of a double-edged sword. The idea behind them is that you can, so for example, our show, we are at we're like right at the cusp before which, or after which, I guess I should say, advertising with us makes sense to a big company, right? And some companies like Audible or those sorts of ones like that, they're on every single podcast ever. Other companies are a little bit more selective about like what they do, and then the way you get paid out on that is different for each company. And so with a podcast network, the idea is that you can have, if you're buying an ad with a network of 10 shows that each get 10,000 downloads, it's as effective or maybe even more effective than one show with 100,000 downloads.
Okay.
Because you're hitting different audiences, and maybe they're a little bit more loyal and they're more willing to click and whatever. So that's kind of the way that networks do those things. Most independent podcast networks that I've been a part of are not able to hit that promise that they'll actually get advertising to you, because it really takes time. It's not getting advertisers really takes a lot of outreach on your part, right? You have to be doing it for a long time before people actually come to you and ask, do you want to advertise for our product?
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's, networks are great, but again, it's all about, you should always be thinking to yourself, what can I bring to this group, and what can this group do for me that I'm missing, or I can
Mhm.
grow from? That's kind of the way I always try to look at it.
Okay. No, that sounds good. For these last couple of minutes of our mentor chat, the floor is open for audience participation audibly. So if you have a question or comment, not concerns though, because I'm not accepting those, you feel free to unmute yourself. You can also put your question in the chat and I will ask it as always. And if no one has questions, I will keep talking. So it's in everyone's best interest.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, I wanted to ask, I think about I've been doing a lot of reading around like scientists and like health officials and that kind of thing, sort of what responding to like trolling or hate like that comes with increased visibility, especially like potentially like you were mentioning like topics like climate science, or I can imagine other topics you cover might also attract a certain negative type of attention. And I was curious like what you have in place now that maybe you didn't have before, or what approaches you sort of learned along the way about how to handle that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And it's one that I think we sort of don't talk about enough. So actually, it's funny. At the beginning of the series of my podcast, the topic that got me the most hate was, we did a throwaway episode on Morgellons disease. Has anyone have ever heard of Morgellons before? Basically, it's a condition. It's the doctors believe that it is a form of OCD skin picking, obsessive skin picking. But people who have it claim that their bodies are generating like fibers, like polymer fibers that come from their skin that they have to pick at. And it's a very hot topic online that these believers think, they're afflicted and doctors are ignoring them or whatever. And when we put out that episode, we got like 50 hate emails, and like 300 people listened to the episode because it was like one of the first ones. So I was like, 50 out of 300 is crazy engagement, right? Like, oh my God, these people, this is crazy, some of the things that we have in place now that we didn't before. So number one, we try to be, so some podcasts will tell you that you should steer clear of those sorts of hot button issues that'll get people to send you hate mail or write a bad review or whatever. And I think that is ridiculous. You should not censor yourself or your voice because other people might get mad. And you also shouldn't shy away from having opinions or beliefs and talking about them if you think they're relevant to the show. So our show, we do a show on the history of science, and part of the history of science is pseudoscience and economic and political and social structures causing horrible things in the sciences, right? So with an episode like climate change, of course we're going to mention politics, of course we're going to mention economics and these inequality and justice and things like that, right? So part of that is a conscious choice by us. And so once you make that conscious choice to be provocative, socially conscious, fighting for causes and things like that, once you make that choice, you sort of have to be prepared for the hate. It's going to come. It's the internet, right? It's what's going to happen. Some of the things that we've done, so Marie in particular, she doesn't really use social media. We never post photos of her family or people. We never give out addresses, anything like that. We got a PO box, which we hadn't done before. We used to just have mail sent to my house if people wanted it. We stopped that. We got a PO box that people can send over to. if they want to send mail or whatever. And honestly, too, part of it is just sort of giving yourself days off of social media. Twitter Twitter can particularly be brutal, especially if you decide to be somebody who is skeptical of different things like homeopathy or Scientology or UFOs or whatever, right? There's communities online that will come after you for having those sort of counter beliefs. And part of it is sort of like, well, just don't get involved with those groups, then that won't happen. But to me, that always kind of seemed like you're just sort of giving up on people, right? You're saying like, well, those people are already lost to conspiracy theory. We shouldn't talk to them anymore. And that's crazy, right? There should always be you should always be able to have open dialogue, I feel like, between people. And then if it's not going anywhere, you need to be cognizant enough to say, I got to step back from this. Yeah. But it's a hard question. I mean, you see it all the time. People are nuts out there sometimes with this stuff. They get really intense. Yeah, it's a great question.
Is anyone else? You don't even have to raise your Zoom hand. You can just unmute. No? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so I have a question. I don't know that I'm gonna do this, but I've done some science writing, and if I was curious about dipping my toes into doing a podcast, if I wanted to know whether it was for me, what are ways I could do that? Especially I would be interested in maybe collaborating with somebody or just seeing how the process works. What are opportunities where I could find those?
Yeah, so a lot of podcasts are very interested in having people work for them and do volunteering stuff, right? So on our show, we've actually had a couple of, first off, my show came from volunteering with another podcast. We've had shows come from volunteering on our show. So I think part of it would be reaching out to shows you like and asking, is there a place for someone to help you do stuff? You know what I mean? Independent shows are going to be the easiest, right? Those shows that are made by shows that are made by large companies, those hosts, those writers, those people tend to be a little bit harder to contact directly because again, they're doing it through a company, through a business, right? But yeah, reach out to people, see what they think, if you could help. The other thing you might want to look into too is there is a lot of good writing and even podcast on making a podcast, and seeing like, is this something I want to do? I think for a lot of scientists and a lot of people interested in science communication, part of the reason you get involved in making a podcast is because number one, full-time employment as like a science communication specialist can be quite hard to come by. Right? It's not really a job you apply for. It's kind of one you fall into, I find. And the other part of it that can be challenging is not wanting to be involved with or wanting to help kind of do good science communication or effective science communication that maybe doesn't happen so much, say at on most websites or in most newspapers or things like that. I'm lucky in that my day job and my podcast both involve science communication, but I'm very fortunate. So in some ways with this field, it's kind of you have to be self-starting to get it to go, so, but yeah, I think reach out to people and see what they say. Definitely.
I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, hi, I'm Martina. I'm also a science writer, and I'm trying to get into the more media space. This was very helpful. And I wanted to know what is, like you said, you have a day job and you do this on the side. I write on the side, but I feel like writing in the day job is easier to manage. But
Mhm.
how do you manage like podcasting and working a full-time job? And my daytime job is still in the science communication space.
Mhm.
But I want to transition to other science communication jobs after my fellowship is over.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I drink a lot of coffee. It's a lot of late nights. Again, this is a labor of love. So, the podcast really, the topic I chose for the podcast was one that I knew I was going to be reading these kinds of books in my free time anyways. So the research part of it was something I knew I was already going to be doing. Um, my day job, I'm a consultant. So my day job, I'm lucky that my day job allows me flexibility in my schedule, and also involves a lot of talking about science with clients and academic institutions and things like that during my normal working hours. So I kind of feel like both skill sets kind of reinforce each other. But in terms of the time and everything else, really the podcast it's another full-time job. It is another full-time job. And so you can choose sort of how you want to release things. And one effective way that I've seen is once you hit a certain point of listenership, your podcast sort of becomes self-sustaining. So after about year one, it became clear that if we stopped releasing episodes, we would still get 10,000 downloads a year, maybe, which is pretty good in this podcasting world. So now when we go on break, for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, when we go on break, we still get 10,000 downloads a month, right? Because it's just people finding the back catalog and it kind of being a self-sustaining program at that point. So it's a lot of legwork in the very beginning, but if you record 10 episodes, 20 episodes ahead of time and then release them every week, right, for 10 weeks, for 20 weeks, you can do it essentially as like a serialized series where you say, okay, well, this is season 1, and then you take a break to research and write, and then season 2, right? So podcasts don't have to be a once every week thing, right? They can be once every 2 weeks, once every month. The importance is keeping regular to that schedule so that your audience knows what to expect. But yeah, it's a great question though. So it comes down to planning, really. Right? So planning what you want to do, how you want to release them, and what success means for you too is very important, right? So setting those benchmarks and making sure, hey, I'm getting better every episode. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Thanks, Chris.
thank you all so much for the time and attention and the questions at the end here. This was a great time. I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah. And everyone, I'll drop the link to the podcast again in the Slack channel, and some of the keynotes that we've mentioned. So thank you all for joining us live for our mentor chat. And I hope that you all kind of got a sense for a bit more of a sense of like how science communication and podcasting work very well together. The rest of our 2022 mentor chat series is booked up. We've got 2 more for the year. In October, we'll have a Meet the Editors panel with editors from The Conversation, Knowable, Scientific American, and American Scientist magazine. And Mariette will be facilitating that. And then November, we will have a conversation on data-driven science communication with the founder of the 51% Project, Sarah Finney Robinson. And so those, the registration links for those have been shared in the chat and in the hopefully not spammy emails that I have sent you guys at the beginning of each month. And we're also getting our 2023 mentor chats booked as well. There's still space, so if you've got a dream topic or a guest mentor, let me know so we can keep the mentor chats catered to you. You can also put that in the community survey that we sent out for you guys because to keep this free, we got to get money from somebody else. So you got to tell them that we're doing great so they keep giving us money. And I will say that in 2023, we will have a mentor chat with Aaron McDonald, who is the science consultant for Star Trek. No big deal, pretty big deal. Keep us funded, everybody. And with that, our mentor chat is over. Thank you all again for coming. I hope everyone had a great time. I will see you guys, I don't know, on the internet.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.